start the budget workshop, and I will turn it over to our city manager.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This is the most favorite time of the year for many of us in local government. And so today we will present our first budget work session in the budget development process of our FY26 budget. So I will turn it over to Sadia Sitar, who is really smiling because it is really her favorite time of the year, to present the two items we have today.
It really is our favorite time of the year. So good afternoon, Mayor and City Council members. I'm Sadia Sitar, Director of Budget and Management Services here in the City of Raleigh. And as the City Manager mentioned, this is the kickstart to the fiscal year 26 budget development process. Delighted to be here in front of all of you, my third year in a row talking to you all about budgets. But what I am here to talk about today is the engagement that myself and my team conducted as part of the fiscal year 26 budget process. We have a ton of highlights to share with you all today. And then in your second session, later after myself, you'll hear from our Senior Capital Programs Analyst, Hannah Osborne, about giving you a preview of the Capital Improvement Program, as well as our CFO, Allison Bradshaw, talking to you all about the long-term financial planning here in the City of Raleigh. So as the City Manager mentioned, I am here to chit-chat with all of you this afternoon about the engagement that we conducted as part of our budget process here. My goal this afternoon is to chat with you all about the outreach that we conducted as part of the process, go into how we conducted our listening sessions and how they have differed from prior years, and then really spend a lot of time on the feedback that we heard from our community members, and then talk to you all about some next steps as part of not only what we've heard, but also what's to look forward to as part of these budget work sessions moving forward. So let's get started about talking about fiscal year 26's budget engagement. So we have, and as I said, this is my third year doing this here with the City of Raleigh. So the budget efforts that we conducted as part of fiscal year 26 really benefited from the critical lessons that we've learned in prior engagement cycles. In particular, we worked diligently with our communications department to expand outreach efforts through social media, digital advertising, email marketing, and as you can see, print and radio as well. You might have seen us on WRAL in the mornings as you're getting ready for work. I also did a less than 2-minute stint on Despierta Raleigh. We were on the radio in both Spanish and English. We were also on these Ike kiosks, as you can see to the right of your screens here in downtown. We were advertised in Go Raleigh buses. We were in the Carolinian, and we were also in we were also in Raleigh Water bills. So again, trying to get the word out as much as possible and trying to reach diverse audiences as part of this effort. So our listening sessions, again, were a little bit different this year, unlike prior years where we've done, we started with 3 sessions, we then expanded to 15, but what we really learned as part of the process was that it wasn't the quantity, it was the quality. It was the questions that we were asking our residents to give them the feedback. So we did 2 virtual sessions. We actually started in December. And why December? Just like I've said in the past, we didn't just have a municipal election, we had a presidential election in November. So a lot of our community centers were occupied as early voting sites. And then we also did our very popular Budget and Brews event. We brought it back this year. This year, we took the feedback that we received from residents and we left downtown. We went to Clouds Brewing on Front Street, got a fantastic viewing, even though it was a very cold and rainy evening. So that was a plus. And then we also held 5 in-person sessions. Again, I did want to highlight that we again focused on accessibility through the provision of essential accommodations that included providing interpreters should anybody need any. We provided folks the option to ask for interpreters during the sign-in process. And then we also offer childcare services through our personnel at Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources. So huge shout out to both Communications and PRCR for assisting us for a 3rd year in a row as we did engagement. You'll also see in the slide in front of you that we visited all of your districts here. We held in-person sessions in the evening, on weeknights, at Abbots Creek, Millbrook, Laurel Hills, Pullen Park, as well as Barwell Road. So again, trying to make sure that we hit all these different sites just like we've done in prior years as well. So what was the purpose of our listening sessions? This photo here is of one of our teammates, Lauren Williams, talking to the community about budget and all the fun that it entails. There was a three-pronged approach to our listening sessions, and I wanted to just chat with you all about a little bit about what that entails. And that, as you can see in front of you, involved education, access, and feedback. So education, we always start off by talking about what the budget is, and we like to just lay it out. So it's a policy document, it's a communications device, practically. It communicates our priorities and our values, but we went a little bit further. We talked about our current budget, sort of where the money comes from. That's our revenues, where the money goes, that's our expenses. And then we deep dived a little bit into the different kinds of budget, what's operating, what's capital. And speaking of capital, this year we wanted to enlighten folks a little bit about the capital budget as well. So we talked to them a little bit about PAYGO, which is cash financing versus debt financing. And the reason why we did that is because in prior years, folks really had a lot of questions about that, so this was our way to respond to that. We also, as part of the education process, when a person walked into, let's say, a community center, or even if they were in a virtual session, we created a one-pager which shared the city, county, and state services. So a distinction between all the three, because we've learned in the past that a lot of folks think that we fund libraries, which we don't, or that we're responsible for schools. So we wanted to lay that information out in front of the folks that were in attendance. So a huge kudos to the budget folks up here who made that happen and worked with both Wake County and the state to kind of produce that document. Now let's talk a little bit about access. So in prior years, we understand that when we put a budget book together, it's about 480, 500 pages. Nobody besides us in the budget office, those of us who love to read that document, is actually going page by page. So what we've created, if you look to the right of your screens, is a budget at a glance, where we produce a 4-pager, and it's a budget at a very high level. What's our key investments? What's our key priorities? What have we funded this year? What have we learned as part of the process, the engagement process? But what the budget team did this as part of fiscal year 25's budget is that we actually put together, and this is available on our website at budget.raleighnc.gov, we created an interactive budget dashboard. So a purpose of the listening session was also to understand from the community whether they have actually been using these cool things that we've been putting out for them. So we asked the community a couple of questions. The first, we wanted to know if they'd actually heard of the dashboard, and about 35% of the folks in attendance had. And then we asked them if they'd used it. 11% said they had. And then for those in the audience who weren't familiar with it or who hadn't used it, we then demoed it for them. And surprisingly, we got a lot of positive feedback. Folks found this accessible, folks found it transparent, they appreciated that they could toggle between expenses and revenues, they appreciated that they could see trends, that they could see how our department budget fluctuated year over year, but then what they also appreciated was that we provided with categories of spending. So here is what we spend on people versus what we spend on stuff. So folks really like that. So now let's go into the listening sessions, or what we heard from our residents. So in prior years, we were very open-ended in the questions that we asked folks, which is, hey, we offer park services, or we offer, let's say, we've got public safety. What would you like to see? So it was very, very open-ended questions, but this year we took it a step further and we're a little targeted in our approach. So we asked 5 questions from the folks in attendance at our listening sessions. And the beauty of asking these 5 questions was that we were actually able to get real-time data. And how we did that was that we used a technology called Slido.com. So folks in attendance could scan a QR code when they saw a question, and they could enter their responses in real time, and we were able to see those responses in real time. In the past, we had had folks write their responses in Post-it notes and then come back and transcribe them, making sure that we copied that information verbatim. This year, we got rid of all the middleman. So whatever you will see published in the engagement report by the end of this month will be verbatim from the mouths of our community members directly. So let's get back to the questions. We wanted to know our story as a city. We wanted to know, what do we do really well? What do we don't do so well? We also wanted to know, hey, what would you like to add to the budget? What would you like to, need I say the word, cut from the budget? And then the last question was very open-ended, saying, if you haven't, if there are any other priorities that you'd like to add, what would those be? So let's talk a little bit about those questions. The first question being, which City of Raleigh service or amenity do you value the most? And what does the city do well that you would like to see it continue? So this is something I shared with all of you when we met at the retreat last month. And no surprise there, over half of the folks love our parks, they love our greenways, they love our trails, they love our pools. And some of you here are really avid bikers and runners who take advantage of those greenways and trails, know that we have some top-notch facilities here. It was also really gratifying to see that folks really love Raleigh water and stormwater and solid waste. Folks were really happy with their solid waste services. They called out garbage, recycling, yard waste. Some folks were that we have the best tasting water, which I'm sure that our Raleigh water director would agree with since we win a lot of awards there. But folks were also happy with our stormwater efforts. And then folks were really happy with our public safety efforts as well. They called out our firefighters, our first responders there. They talked about our police personnel, as well as our ECC 911 call takers. So really thinking that here are the three services that folks think that the city does really, really well. Then we asked folks, fine, this is what we do really well. What do you feel, what service or amenity do you think is kind of missing from your neighborhood? So we wanted to focus on the folks in their neighborhoods. And we had, like I said, we had folks, we did host listening sessions in each of the 5 districts, but again, folks were from all over. So here is what people said were services or amenities provided by the city that they felt were missing from their neighborhood. So no surprise there, sidewalks, again, street maintenance. Again, this is focused on really looking at a person's neighborhood. Heard a lot of talk about the frequency of buses, and bus shelters being a cause for concern with a lot of our folks. Traffic calming and management, again, popped out a lot. Folks were really concerned about that. And then, of course, no surprise, again, affordable housing. Folks were really concerned about those things as well. So this is sort of what we could do a little bit better, what folks said were missing and something that we could improve upon. So I want to tell you that when I go into your third question, which is what service or amenity typically provided from the city that you feel is missing from the city as a whole, which is the next question that you'll see, we got a plethora of responses and nothing really popped out per se. So you will be seeing a bit of a word cloud here, but I'm going to talk about it with you. Here you go. Lots there. It was really, really difficult to kind of parse out and select exactly what people were saying because people just had a lot to add. These are multiple responses from sometimes the same individual. You'll see housing there, you'll see affordable there, you'll see community, you'll see programs, you'll see transportation, that again goes back to the frequency of buses there in the notes that I've read so far. You'll see maintenance, that also resonates. We've heard a lot about street maintenance. You'll also see affordable, again, community, talking about the unhoused, the homeless. Some folks had concerns about composting as well. So there was a lot that was thrown at us there. And again, you'll see all of this feedback when you read the engagement report. Now, the next question that we asked folks was, so this was the question that we asked, which says, wait, I feel like I maybe skipped a slide. Maybe I didn't. But this is what folks would like to add to the budget. My apologies there. So this is everything that folks said we would like to add to the budget. Now, the next question that we asked them, well, that's great. You want to add all this to the budget. What would you like to cut? We got some really funny looks in that regard, but something did pop out here. And unfortunately, it is a 4-letter word, and it is LEAF, L-E-A-F. So now, how could that be? I will tell you that in my 3rd year of doing this, this is the first year that seasonal loose leaf collection popped out, and it could be because of when we were doing it. We never do these in December, but we were doing it in December. We had a lot of folks very disgruntled about this service. I have already spoken to our transportation director about this, so he should not be surprised. But again, that was the big 4-letter word that kept on popping out at each and every session. We also heard folks talking about, you'll see parking there. Folks wanted us to get rid of our parking decks. I mean, folks had a lot of opinions. Like I said, it's really hard. And again, these were all available to us interactively, live, right then and there. So, but these will all be available for you to read at your leisure. So after that, we asked them, what else would you like to prioritize as part of the budget process? Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm happy that you're engaged. Thank you. So the last question, what are your priorities for the upcoming city budget that you haven't yet gotten to share? No surprise there. Housing popped up. Folks had a lot of comments on the budget and the budget process, what they'd like to see. Folks had some questions. Again, you'll see the word affordable. You'll see the word employee pay. You'll see housing. Again, folks had a lot of concerns about transportation, about infrastructure, about employee pay. So folks were a little all over the place. But again, this is that opportunity. The listening sessions are a perfect opportunity for vote. This is, we want to hear, so that's what we were there to do.
Can you remind us how many people these word clouds are?
These are 121 folks with multiple responses.
Okay.
Yes.
And just to clarify,
Yes, sir.
word cloud does a word and not a phrase. So affordable housing is broken up into 2 words.
That is correct. Thank you. Okay, so those were the 5 questions that we asked folks. So now that we've seen and heard all of this, where do we go? So I'm excited to share that right now myself and members of the city manager's office are engaged in budget meetings with all the department directors. Our goal in those meetings is to share this feedback that we've heard from them, particularly the director of, let's say, transportation and other departments who we hear time and time again that these are concerns that our residents have. And I also want to say that I've written here that we'll incorporate resident feedback into the development of the
BMS.
Oh my goodness. Budget and Management Services. That's another ding against me. The first ding was at the City Council retreat when I left another acronym. I'll make sure I learn. But yes, hopefully there won't be a third time. Yes. So Budget and Management Services will incorporate resident feedback into the development of the fiscal year 26 budget. So I just want to go back a little bit because this is my 3rd budget. So in fiscal year 24, folks had a lot of concerns about neighborhood traffic concerns there as well. We always fund the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program as part of our capital budget. Last year, folks had a lot of concerns about sidewalks. That's what our $1 million in PB went to. And this year, again, we hope to deliver on those results that we've heard as part of the budget in the fiscal year 26 proposed budget as well. So moving forward, our budget work sessions, this is the first one. We have a second one scheduled for March 10th. That'll be all HR. We'll be talking about, or not we'll, our HR director, Charnel Jones, will be talking about the classification and compensation study as well as HR benefits. And then April 7th, my team will come back to you to talk about annual grants, our annual grants program here in the city. And then you'll also be hearing from the enterprise departments such as Raleigh Water, Stormwater, as well as Solid Waste Services. And then we hope to, knock on wood, bring a balanced proposed budget to you all on May 20th. So that was my presentation this afternoon, and I would like to now open the floor to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Councilor Silver.
Thank you, Sadia, for a very entertaining presentation. I could see why this one was different, and Slido was a great idea. In all the years I've watched budgeting, both as a person in government and then watching, the most confusing to residents is understanding expense, capital, and in this case, enterprise. In your conversations, did that ever surface? Because a lot of people say, oh, I want this funded, thinking it's an expense, just put X amount into it, and we can get it done, versus understanding expense, capital, and then enterprise. But I think expense and capital are the main 2 distinctions. Was that ever clarified, or you just did your outreach based upon those 5 questions?
So one of the things that we did right at the beginning of every listening session, council member, is do a little education. And that's where we were able to say, hey, there's different types of budgets. There's an operating budget, which is kind of your everyday stuff. There's a capital budget, which is stuff that takes a really long while to build. Those are your parks, your community centers. And then there's stuff that's run like a business. Those are your enterprises, and that's why you charge fees. So when we laid that groundwork, that actually didn't bring up those kind of questions that folks had. So we were able to do that education in the beginning and kind of, lay the groundwork for a very productive listening session with folks.
And just one follow-up, because I want to be clear as they have conversations for sidewalks, yes, some of that could be done in an expense budget, but the vast majority is a capital budget.
Correct.
If there's concerns about affordable housing, yes, we have programs, but if you really want to do something, that may have to be a bond. So I just want to understand when people say, I want this in the budget, saying, wait a minute, we may have to go out, decide if we wanted to do a bond in order to fund it, so they understand for a sidewalk or something that is a huge capital expense. I just want to make sure you're not leaving away with the expectation, oh, I put in my input, and now we're going to get a citywide sidewalk program when that is something most likely will have to be part of a bond and will take longer to
Correct.
implement versus the budget, which is every fiscal year.
Correct.
So were they clear about that? Because I
were
know
clear
we're
about
getting
this.
questions about, can you do this large expenditure? I'm like, that's a capital expenditure.
No, no, no. They were absolutely clear about this. In fact,
Okay.
we know that folks in this city in particular are really concerned about their sidewalks. So we made sure that when we talked about the capital budget, we highlighted sidewalks. Yes.
Counselor Patton.
Yep. Hi, thank you. I always look forward to these. Yeah, sidewalks have been like far and away the thing we've heard over and over again across the years. So I think that should be a signal to us both that our community wants us to fund it with our dollars, but also that they would benefit from us innovating on how to like sort of increase our capacity to meet what they're hoping to see in their neighborhoods. I also thought it was really astute, and I'm glad that you asked folks what they would be willing to go without in order to have some of the things that they would like to see instead. So I have, in my interactions with the community, often put that question to folks and find that they're like, well, nothing. Please don't raise my taxes, but do add services and don't let anything go. And that's a really tough needle to thread. So I'm glad that we put it to the residents, and I'm glad that they offered something that's useful for our consideration. I believe we're having a work session about loose leaf in the coming weeks or months? Okay.
Yes.
Great. Two questions I did have. One is that I know a lot of folks attended multiple times, and I'm curious how you are calibrating the data so that we're not amplifying the voices of our repeat attendees at the expense of folks who might have only attended once.
That is great. That is a fantastic question, and that's actually something that my staff just talked to me and just wanted to share with you all. When an individual scans a QR code and writes their response or multiple responses, I am not able to tell if it's coming from one person or two people or three. And that is why you will see some things elevated more from the same individuals that attended multiple sessions as opposed to those that attended once, but may have said something that others in the room also echoed. So unfortunately, through that tool, we were not able to calibrate for that. But I totally understand that that is concerning.
Got it. Okay. So the survey does. So when we publish the full engagement report, we'll be able to, if the survey results mimic what we've seen here.
So I did not do a survey this year.
Okay.
Yes. And the reason I didn't was because the Office of Strategy and Innovation is doing their very statistical randomized survey, whereas my surveys have never been randomized. I literally go and hound people to complete my survey. That's not randomized. But what we have learned in prior years is when we've done our survey and they've done their survey, the results have been fairly similar. So we decided not to do a survey this year and instead wait for them to do their survey, wrap those results up, and hopefully those should be available to us prior to the budget proposal in May.
Okay,
Yes.
that's helpful. And then my second question was around, like you acknowledged that in a prior year, you had done these engagement sessions earlier, and then due to the election and the use of the community centers, this year it was pushed back. We do have elections every other year, so I'm curious, like, should we expect and should the public expect that in off-cycle years, the engagement sessions will always be early, and on election years they'll always be later, or is there some like tweaking you're hoping to do? Or
Well, I think we should always be open to things being different. My goal is to conduct them in October of this calendar year because that's kind of what we do. We do engagement before we kick off the budget process. But yes, now I will say that things were a little bit different as well because it wasn't just a municipal versus a presidential election. So I'm not sure about if I can give you a definitive answer standing in front of you right now, but
Sure.
I will say definitively that we will start in October this year. Yes.
Okay, Counselor Jones and then Branch.
Hi, Sadia. Thank you so much. First of all, I just want to congratulate you on a great job with the engagement. I was able to attend District E, and I'm so proud that we went from 5 people last year to overnight. I think it's about 19, 20 people
Yes,
in
that is
District
correct,
E.
yeah.
And so I'm really, really proud of the work that you guys put into that, because that's how we're going to measure, as we grow. Like, that's my job to help get people out there on those meetings. So great job on that. Going to back to the social media slide at the beginning, knowing that you use the IKEs, the email, and all that, do you have one that was the most, like the best performing in social media that got you the most responses?
I will have to speak to our communications administrator and get back to you on that.
Yeah, no problem. I just love.
Oh, we have Robin Deacle, our communications director. She can respond.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Robin.
Hi there, Robin Deacle, the Communications Director. I can give you the first layer, which is that Facebook is by far our most impressions and engagement on the budget survey.
Really?
Yes, by far.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. And so with that data, and hang on, I may have a follow-up question. With that data, does that guide you on next year, or how will you use the information to now grow the response for next year?
I'll be a little vague like Sadia was with the sessions themselves. Absolutely, the data informs what we do next, because sometimes you want to put a little bit more where you have a bigger audience or a certain kind of audience that you want to reach, but more often than not, you put your dollars where they're going to get the most impressions, engagement, that kind of thing. So I think just generally, I would say that probably means we put a little bit more time and effort into our Facebook posts next year.
Interesting. And then I just wanted to second and just put my little pin in for next year. When we change that, as you guys are looking at going from October to December, I know that was frustrating for residents this year because there was the waiting for October and then it came in December, January. And so, however we look forward, whatever it's going to be, just being more consistent might help with that explanation to residents. And then I did just want to highlight, you did in the words, when we got to the words, but especially in my meeting, when we talked about staff and how great our staff is, residents made a big point to say that while we love it, we want them to be paid more. And I'm sure that was reflected in
other sessions as
in
well.
other sessions as well,
Yes.
but I only attended mine. And so I wanted to make that yes, we are congratulating all our staff, as well as understanding that we are not paying them what we need to pay them. And that was reflected. So I just wanted that on the record. So thank you so much for your work.
Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you for the presentation. My question goes to the educational piece. I know you say you did a lot up front of sharing information, and this kind of brings Robin to this as well. Have we thought about doing a video of that educational piece? And that way it's on the website and you have it year round, people can find
Yes.
it. And then when you're prepping people for the sessions, you can send the link in advance. So that way, when you get into the meetings, you can have more conversation about the actual budget and what they want and don't want, instead of having to do all the educational piece.
That is fantastic. It's something that have spoken to the communications director about, because there's one thing to have staff stand up there and talk about the budget, but it's another to have like a really creative animated video saying, hey, look at, so other cities have done that. When I was in Philly, we did that as well, and it was just fabulous. People just really engaged with a video, and I think I would like to do a video on, how the budget is made, and then at the end, once we adopt the budget, it'll be like, what's in the budget as well. So not one, but two for our residents.
Cool, thank you. My last question is, when we talked about the word cloud and you said how it's all calibrated and do you have a word cloud from each session that will be in the backup materials? And then that way we can tell, okay, we can get an idea based upon the session or where in the community that session was held, what was elevated within that session.
So I do not have the results by district. Okay. I have them by question. Okay. That's how we, geared them. We do have some notes that staff captured at each district, which I would be happy to add to the engagement report for you.
And this last piece, and this may be more of an IT part, is carry on from that. When the data is entered that you're collecting, I'm sure there's a timestamp somewhere on the back end. Just see if IT could possibly pull that, and then they know each date in which that information was
I have
added.
the date. I do.
Perfect.
It's
Okay.
just that. So I understand what you're saying. I have all the data from Slido, and I can go and say on, let's say on the 6th of January, I went to that's my district, District D, and this is the question that I asked, and this is how it was responded. This is not how I have thought about approaching the engagement report, but if it's something that council would like by district, which I see you nodding your heads, we'll have to pivot and make some changes there. It may delay when the report comes out, but I'd like to think on that a little bit and see what works best.
Yeah, just think about it. I don't want to hold it up or delay it, but just something to think about, a way to just pull it. And that gives us an idea, because I honestly feel that as great as our city is and community is, certain parts have things that they kind of want to see more than others.
Sure.
Well, and then it would also be helpful to just see the demographics, is this a representative? We know it's not statistically valid and we don't have enough people, but it would still be helpful to know, was this somewhat representative or does it skew? So all that sort of analysis so we can sort of assess this with context.
Absolutely.
And I'm sorry, I forgot one question, and that was it regarding the participatory budgeting.
Yes.
That was really exciting. Will that continue into this budget? I don't remember us talking about it at the session.
So my response to that, and I knew somebody was going to ask me about PB. So PB takes about 18 months. We did it on steroids here in the city of Raleigh, where we just did this really fantastic, I would say, process. Now we are working together with the Transportation Department as well as with Parks and Recreation and Engineering Services to make those projects happen. So I would rather see the results of that before we pour more money into that. But then on the other end, I would also like to add with City Council that communities who do PB have actually a resource within the city that does PB. And for our budget office and the analysts to do PB, it's a hefty task. So with that, I'm not sure. It's a frank response.
No,
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So it sounds like you need to put an additional headcount in your budget proposal. That's what I'm hearing.
Not going to say anything. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council, City Manager, and City Attorney. I'm Hannah Osborne, the city's Senior Capital Programs Analyst. Here's today's agenda. So first, I will speak generally on capital budgeting and elements that are specific to the city of Raleigh. Next, I will walk through Raleigh's capital budget process and present a preview of the city's 5-year CIP, or to say out the whole acronym, Capital Improvement Program. Then I will turn over the presentation to Allison Bradsher, our Finance Director, to discuss long-term financial planning. To start, I will define terms that we'll be using throughout the presentation. A capital budget is a legal document adopted by ordinance that contains funding sources and appropriations for capital assets that exceed a selected financial amount known as the capital budget threshold. The City of Raleigh's capital budget threshold is $25,000. A capital asset is a tangible or intangible item with a useful life that extends beyond one fiscal year. In the state of North Carolina, a fiscal year is July 1 to June 30th. A fire station is an example of a tangible capital asset, and a computer software is an example of an intangible capital asset. Capital funding can be classified into two broad types: debt financing and pay-go. The city uses a range of debt mechanisms. General obligation bonds are approved through ballot initiatives and are backed by the taxing power of the city. Typically, parks and recreation facilities, affordable housing, and major transportation projects are funded with general obligation bonds. Limited obligation bonds are issued based on available debt capacity and are generally used for city facilities. Revenue bonds are primarily used by Raleigh Water to fund water and sewer infrastructure projects. PAYGO sources include direct general fund support, fees, and specific program income. Unless otherwise designated by council, general fund PAYGO can be applied to any project, whereas certain fees and program income may only support very specific eligible projects. Enterprise funds account for operations that are financed in a manner similar to private businesses and have user fees to directly generate revenue. Enterprise funds also use debt financing. At the April 7th budget work session, many of these enterprise departments will present their FY26 operating and capital budgets. For that reason, today's presentation is going to focus on general fund capital elements. The city organizes our general fund capital budget into these elements. I do want to point out that general public improvements include citywide facility maintenance, new facility construction, including fire stations, planning and studies, and economic development initiatives. So it's a pretty broad category.
Can I just ask one quick question about, so affordable housing, Raleigh Housing Authority, I realize is not on your other list, but I know they are trying to get bonding authority so they can issue debt. Where are there important entities like the Raleigh Housing Authority that fall outside of this list?
I'll say that there may be, this conveys ones that are considered formal city departments.
Right.
Yeah, good afternoon. Allison Bradshaw with the Finance Department. I think that's a great question, and definitely the Raleigh Housing Authority. We have certainly been in conversations with them recently about their future desire to essentially offer some debt financing. You know, certainly other partners like Wake County with the Wake Transit Plan, et cetera, those would be the ones that immediately come to mind.
Okay. Thank you.
As previously approved by City Council, there are 4 capital areas with dedicated 1 cent equivalent of the property tax rate. This policy decision commits funding for affordable housing, street resurfacing, parks maintenance, and citywide PAYGO projects. In addition to dedicated PAYGO funding, as discussed, affordable housing, major transportation projects, and parks and recreation facilities are also funded through general obligation bonds. The city builds out our 5-year PAYGO CIP, assuming a 2% annual growth in the value of a penny. And that's why you see an estimated 11.628 currently in FY26. Those numbers are not final yet. That is our current estimation that we build out a 2% estimated growth. As mentioned, starting in FY25, the capital budget includes a dedicated general fund support for projects best suited for PAYGO funding. This dedicated general funding provides support for bond ineligible projects and commits support to external facing programs. Internally, it also allows us to better plan for project delivery. This slide just serves as a refresher of where dedicated PAYGO funding was awarded last fiscal year. As previously mentioned, the city builds out the 5-year PAYGO CIP, assuming 2% growth in revenue. On average, this is just an example, the cost per curb ramp replacement and per square yard of street resurfacing and sidewalk repair increases between 8 to 13% annually. Another example is that over the past year, the cost to replace HVAC systems has increased by 90%, and then jumping from the past 3 years, the cost per square yard of bridge repair has increased by 65%, and the cost to replace video cameras hardware has increased by a staggering 250%. So while we accomplish many projects and ongoing initiatives with our PAYGO support, I do want to note that the cost to deliver these projects outpaces assumed revenue growth. In this next section, I will walk through the city's capital improvement process and give a preview for FY26. This first step in the process is about identifying capital needs. That said, I want to acknowledge that departments do specific work throughout the year and earlier than October, but October is when our office, the budget office, starts to formally accept and receive requests from departments with their capital needs. Right now, the city is in step 2 and 3, just so you can see there on the timeline, but I just want to see that's where we are right now. We are actively evaluating and prioritizing needs and identifying the most appropriate funding mechanisms for each project. In early December, the formal process for collecting capital budget needs concludes. This and the following slide display the value of requests for general fund elements for FY26 or fiscal year 26 through fiscal year 30. This information excludes dedicated PAYGO support for street resurfacing, parks maintenance, and affordable housing. In addition, it excludes current and future general obligation bonds, since they require approval through ballot initiatives. As you see displayed, the largest capital commitment requested over this 5-year timeframe is for fire stations, followed by transportation and then new city facilities. Here's another way to visualize the requested capital needs over this 5-year timeframe. And I'm going to take a moment to just highlight a few of them and explain what's under the categories. So public safety construction, which made up 40% of the identified needs, is largely for fire stations and replacement for new fire stations and replacements of ones that have reached their end of their useful life. Traffic management includes things like bridge repair identified through inspections, new traffic signals, and the neighborhood traffic management program, which installs traffic calming measures. And then active mobility includes Vision Zero enhancements, such as crosswalks, audible pedestrian signals, and other safety improvements for ADA compliance, American Disability Act. External community support includes the Building Upfit Grant, the Facade Improvement Grant, and the Impact Partner Grants. Building maintenance includes projects to maintain, upgrade, or replace tangible capital assets to ensure compliance and to enhance the health and safety of employees. Technology needs include tangible assets like equipment for the new City Hall and intangible assets like replacing the city's existing enterprise resource platform. In December and January, departments present their prioritized capital requests to the city manager. From January through February, requests are evaluated using these 9 criteria. Greatest weight is given to projects needed for safety concerns and to address regulatory compliance. Evaluation feedback is then shared with the city manager and directly informs our capital budgeting decisions. The city is currently in this stage of the process and is also in the next stage of the process. So I presented it in a very linear fashion, but these different steps do tend to overlap. From January through February, the Budget and Finance departments identify most appropriate financing mechanisms, debt or PAYGO, for the requested projects. This process also involves reviewing departments' available capital budgets and reallocating budgets to meet some of those capital needs. The largest capital funding source is debt. When you issue debt for a project, current and future users are paying for the project. In addition, debt financing represents long-term financial commitments, which have lasting policy impact. For example, Parks bond projects were primarily debt financed. These projects take years to complete, and when complete, will serve to benefit both current and future Raleigh residents. Other projects, which are reasonably accomplished in one fiscal year and have an immediate annual benefit to the public, are primarily funded through PAYGO financing. For example, planned bridge repairs. Although bridge repairs will benefit future residents, there is an immediate need to deliver on these projects annually. Therefore, bridge repairs are best suited for PAYGO financing. Another reason to use PAYGO financing for specific projects is it preserves our debt capacity for much larger capital projects. And then another reason to use PAYGO financing is because those projects, such as the purchase of generators, are not eligible for debt financing. All right, so level setting where we are now. We're currently in step 2 and 3. I'm going to present a little bit about step 4, but that's where we're going to next. We are still in the evaluating stage and identifying the most suitable financing mechanisms for each project. So in March, the city starts to prepare the proposed 5-year CIP. The next slide presents a preview of what council could see in the proposed budget. Uh-oh. I think a slide is missing. And it was on there in dress rehearsal. It's okay. Okay. Well, Allison, how do you feel if I go forward to some of your other slides to see if it just happens to be moved somehow? Everyone just close your eyes for a moment. All right, it's definitely not there. All right, so what I will share, that's why it's a preview. It's such a preview that it's not even visually there. So imagine that I have segmented this off into 6 categories to present you a preview. The first category is new facilities, and that includes fire stations and facilities that serve city operations, such as a new vehicle fleet services structure and facility. And then the next category that you would see is transportation, and you can expect to see continued funding for the city's Vision Zero efforts, bridge repairs, and other initiatives. And then the next block on there would be capital technology. And so what you can see there in the next 5 years includes needs to support the technology at the new 911 backup center and replacement of the city's, as I mentioned, enterprise records and planning software. And then the next box, we could going down a line, first row in the next line, the city's CIP is expected to continue its support for external-facing programs. To highlight a few, the Impact Partner Grant supports underrepresented innovators, and then the Public Project Community Support Fund helps to address impacts to residents and businesses resulting from qualified large-scale capital projects, and bus rapid transit is an example of that. All right, now we're second row middle. Council can expect to see continued funding for building maintenance and site security improvements. And then the final category is titled Other Projects, and to highlight one within that box would be the city's Civic Places program, which is led by the Department of Planning and Development. And this city-led program integrates placemaking elements in public infrastructure projects. Now I will turn over the podium to Allison Bradsher, the city's finance director, to discuss long-term financial planning.
Before you go,
Yes.
so just to clarify, yep, and then these are all non-enterprise
Correct.
projects.
Yes.
And it would be good to get a feel for the size of the capital projects within the enterprise
Relation.
funds relative to this bucket that we just discussed.
Yes. All right.
Okay.
I have a question as well.
I just had a comment and a question. You can go back to the evaluation criteria. First, let me applaud you because being on the other side as former planning director, this is extremely helpful. And I was going to ask, this is what I'll look toward as the evaluation criteria when these projects are prioritized. I just had 4 on there, which was life safety, state of good repair, equity, and existing plans. So you went even beyond that. So I applaud you for that. But just want to make sure I know in any given year, I know you may shift a priority, but I would like to know as these are weighted, once the final priorities come in. Equity is one, and very often community will see a lot more money is invested in one community and not the other. I know the Parks bond, for example, was very intentional about communicating how the bonds are going to be spread throughout the city in a very equitable manner. So just don't know how these are weighted from year to year. Is it change? Are they weighted? Because this, to me, is the most critical slide about how decisions are made about the final 5-year capital improvement plan.
And would you like a response or a budget note on that? I'm happy to respond.
You can respond,
Okay.
yes.
So I will note that this criteria is used for our general fund element projects that we receive and is not for our general obligation bonds. So there might be, and I will say that I've not been here through the creation of one of our general obligation bonds yet, hoping for it in the future. And so with that, though, I will say, you see that there's 9 criteria here. With that, we acknowledge that safety, urgency, and regulatory compliance, if we didn't weight that one, it might lose some of its value to our process. And so that one is weighted by a factor of 3 over the other criteria listed here. So I will note that. We also, some of them are not worth a total of 3 points because one thing that we found, and we've got great departments here who really advocate for their projects, but sometimes it would become a laundry list of all the organizational plans that might align to the project. And so we started to award just 1 point for those projects to be sort of a bonus on them. So there's a specific weight that's making sure that we're still prioritizing those safety, urgency, and regulatory compliance from the front
And
end.
my last question is that, for example, community engagement. Sadia just told us how sidewalks floated to the top of the list. It's very expensive, part of the transportation. Just wanted to know how a request like that would fit in, and if we use some of our capital investment to leverage private sector investment to potentially complete a sidewalk segment versus just it being on the taxpayers to build out the infrastructure.
I believe that when Allison or Ms. Bradshaw presents in a moment, that she will touch on how if we change the way that we are publishing out to the external community, our advanced planning, that it might provide more opportunities for that private intersection.
I had a quick question.
Okay, let me get Councilor Branch and then Mayor Pro Tem Ford.
So for big projects, you mentioned fire and the fire implementation plan and building new centers, new stations. So you have a station, but for the station to work, you need equipment. So is that equipment included in that cost as far as the new station, as far as the engine, ladder, things of that nature?
As it was presented in those numbers, so back, it's forward to the sort of the breakdown of the percent and the total of requested volume in terms of the dollar amount, that only includes the capital cost, so it does not include the equipment. When we solicit this information from departments, they also complete an operating impact section. And so they will put in there say it's a brand new station, what staffing are they going to need to occupy the space, and what equipment will they need. And so then that's factored into future years when we're looking at the budget of what are those operating impacts that will be needed if we move forward with funding these projects.
Okay, thank you.
Can you go back to the identify capital needs pie chart that you had?
Yes.
And this question is probably more for the city manager than for you directly. But when you look at the pie chart and it's public safety, new construction, about 40%, and I know we touched on this real briefly at the retreat, but the possibility of merging construction for RPD and the fire department, like when do we make that shift so we can sort of minimize or not have to duplicate costs of trying to do 2 facilities for each organization or department instead of combining it and doing it for one?
Great question, and we're already testing that model right now with the construction of Station 1 and headquarters, because it will also house the backup for the 911 Emergency Communications Center. So as we move forward, as I shared with you at the retreat, the only way we're going to be able to afford to build out the facilities that a city this size, with the growth patterns that we have experienced over the last several decades, we're going to have to share facilities. Otherwise, the expense and the debt is going to be far beyond the life of the useful life of the facility. So we have been working in the last year and a half when we're looking at how we build these stations, how do we do a dual public safety center? It's not rocket science. There are some communities that do it already, and that is out of necessity. But for us, I think it is for greater efficiencies operationally and financially moving forward.
Okay, any other questions? Not good job with the missing slide, just on the fly.
All right, so good afternoon, Mayor and Council, and thank you, Hannah, for that comprehensive review of the CIP budget process. I'm Allison Bradsher with the Finance Department, and as that is a backdrop, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and do a deeper dive into the long-term financial planning and the steady state concepts that was a topic at your council retreat. So here's the agenda that I plan to cover. Again, long-term financial planning with a quick review of our general debt model, discuss the steady state concept, discuss dedicated funding allocation and advanced capital planning program, and then really based on the discussion at the retreat, lay out a scenario of what steady state may look like. All right, so one important aspect of financial planning is the city's ability to look long-term at the capital investment needs. Debt financing allows for a comprehensive, equitable approach to funding the city's capital investments, and Hannah noted that in her presentation. If the city doesn't generate enough cash, right, on an annual basis to fund large projects such as a new fire station, therefore debt financing is an important tool in our toolbox. We do have several sophisticated financial planning models. Today, I'm really just focusing on the debt model that supports general government capital needs. That enables us to track debt service payments on existing debt that we have. The model incorporates all of our general obligation and limited obligation bonds. And again, GO bonds are where the city has done parks, affordable housing, and transportation, and limited obligation bonds really satisfy the city's infrastructure needs. The model also tracks our management policies, and as a AAA-rated credit entity, that is extremely important and allows us, when we do go into the markets, to get the lowest interest rate we possibly can. Also, the debt model allows us to analyze and run scenarios on what the city's ability to issue debt in the future. So we call that debt capacity. So this chart was one that I shared at the retreat, which really just sort of at a high level talks about steady state and as a concept and recognizes our continued growth and wanting to ensure a transparent approach to funding both operating and capital investments. Recognizing that debt financing needs support our growing city, steady state looks into the future and manages debt affordability over time. Again, 3 key focus areas, which is dedicated funding, advanced capital planning, and then both of those allow for that steady state or that debt affordability as we look to the future. So the dedicated funding allocation really offers a transparent approach to how the city would allocate property and sales tax, which again in the general fund are our 2 largest revenue sources. And that would be between general fund operations and then essentially what would be used for debt service or pay-go. So at the retreat, Councilmember Patton provided a great analogy, so I'm going to walk through that again. So essentially today you deposit your paycheck into your checking account, then you take a second step to maybe transfer some of that into your savings account. Taking this into that real life example into the city's budget process, if you look to the left of the chart, you can see property tax at just under $400 million, and you can see how that allocation would happen in the future. So again, instead of that 400 flowing directly into the general fund, then to the debt service, and then to pay-go, it would essentially be deposited there directly. And you can see with that breakout there. Same concept would apply to sales tax as well. So again, about 80% of sales tax would be allocated to support general fund or ongoing operations. A little less than 20 would help debt service. And part of the conversation today is to not allocate any pay-go dollars coming out of sales tax. Again, these are all just examples, so y'all could see what it would look like from an FY25 budget perspective. So the upfront allocation, again, does that transparency to the public, and it also allows any surplus that may be generated to actually flow into the general fund as well as the debt service fund, which also would increase that capacity. In the year of implementation, one-time initial seed money comes from the lowering of the general capital reserves, and we would use that again to seed the advanced planning program, and then those funds would be replenished later when we would actually go into the debt market. We would essentially reimburse ourselves. So advanced capital planning, again, talked a little bit about how it would be funded. So just wanted to give an example. So the top part of the slide is really kind of the today approach, with the bottom part being the tomorrow approach. And what we were introducing was really today we have a one-step approval process. So the land purchase, any design, construction is all appropriated at one time. So if you look at that one example, it would have been $30 million. As you go through the design process or land acquisition, you will note that plus $5 million, right? So at some point, the project needed an additional infusion of budget for a total of $35 million. So again, at that initial point, because we are so far out in the process, we have the risk that our project estimates are not accurate and that cost overruns can come into play, which could create project delays. So the tomorrow plan is really to allow council a two-step approval process where the design is approved initially, and at some form of design, whether that's 60% or 80% or almost fully designed, the idea is staff then has a much more accurate view of current cost estimates for the construction, which is clearly the largest piece. And so then at that point, what we would put back in front of you is the total project was $35 million. So council then really has the ability to prioritize projects, city resources, and budget needs in a more proactive way instead of a reactive way. So this was a slide also shared at the council retreat, which really just talked about with that dedicated funding allocation, advanced planning, we get into this concept of a steady state model. Again, with the idea that our bonds would be smaller but more frequent with a greater known level of certainty. So obviously the house, the tree, and the roadway illustrate our GO bonds, or our general obligation bonds, which affordable housing, parks, and transportation. And the other building at the bottom essentially is your limited obligation bonds, which are used to support our city infrastructures, such as fire stations. So this chart goes quite a bit further than I did at the council retreat, and I know it's really, really busy and there's a lot of information, so let me just sort of walk you through through the concept here. So based on the discussions at the retreat, the scenarios that I'm putting in front of you now really has the timing of bonds to every 4 years. So if you start at the top left of the chart, here we are in calendar year 2025. We are planning for the FY26 budget year. In the calendar year 2026, there will be an opportunity for council to consider a GO bond on the fall ballot in the fall of calendar year 2026. At that point, we're already into budget year 27. So what you'll see then is you'll see those 3 dotted lines across each of those scenarios. The first one starts at $90 million. So what does that mean? Based on the general debt model and all our known prior CIP-approved projects, as well as the general obligation bonds that have already been voted on by the public, we have debt capacity to issue $90 million of debt every 4 years into the future. The $90 million would cover both general obligation as well as limited obligation bonds. So again, parks, transportation, housing, and then city infrastructure. And council, as a part of the budget process, would decide the mix of funding for each of those 4 purposes. to provide another scenario with a 1 cent property tax increase. Again, these are just scenarios to provide you a perspective. We would increase our capacity to $210 million. Again, for a mix of all four of those purposes and then spread out over 4 years into the future. And then I ran another scenario at 2 cents, and you can see we would have $330 million of capacity, again, for those four types of funding needs. So it is important to know that any increment to the tax rate would actually occur in the FY28 budget process. So I know I have to stop and think myself about what year are we in, what fiscal year are we in, what budget year are we planning. So I really wanted to lay that out as an opportunity for council to see when really future decisions need to be made, which are outside of the current FY26 budget process we're in. So again, this is just one scenario. We can model and consider lots of variables, including the timing of future bonds, et cetera. So I just wanted to put that out there for discussions at the future. Yes.
Yeah, just real quick. So I see you've got a fall referendum every 2 years, but then I see the amounts seem to be changing every 4 years that comes into our budget. Am I missing something?
Yeah, no, that's just the availability that you would essentially have every 4 years. So on that fall, like if we jumped out to year 2028, based on the discussion at the retreat, there would not be a GO bond in this scenario that we would be considering.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
I think so. Thank you.
Counselor Silver.
I had a question about the transportation bonds. Paul, don't jump out of your skin just yet. When I see transportation, I don't know whether the label is better to be transportation or mobility, because I'm assuming by virtue of that title that the vast majority of those funds would go toward cars or roads. And I'm just wondering, of those bonds, what percentage on average is for roads, what is for sidewalks, what is for bicycle facilities? Transportation is a catch-all. Even a symbol has a car. So I just want to make sure as we communicate, is this really just transportation/mobility bonds? And we talked about evaluation criteria in the last segment by Hannah. Just want to know, of that transportation, what is the expectation that what percentage goes toward roads, what percentage goes toward sidewalks or pedestrians and bicycles? It's just helpful to me. And I do know we have development fees both for parks and transportation that go to specific areas where those developments occur. So just getting a better understanding about how we plan for those, because once again, sidewalks have surfaced as a huge community priority.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can give you that breakout from our last transportation bond. I certainly don't have that on the top of my head, but I do know as council would approach a general obligation bond, lots of those discussions and priorities would be included, both from where projects would be located around the city, what types of projects would be addressed, is a critical aspect of that bond planning as council moves forward for any sort of ballot proposal.
So for your $90 million debt capacity every 4 years, does that also take into account other post-employment OPEB liabilities? And then if we were to increase OPEB liabilities, does that reduce the $90 million?
Yeah, so it does not include any other long-term debt that the city has. So specifically on our OPEB, or even the funding that we are required by statute to send to the treasurer's office for, pensions, that is not incorporated into this model at all. This is strictly looking at kind of our revenues in, which is our property tax and our sales tax, and then the true GO or limited obligation bonds that go against that funding. However, it is a really important concept as we get bigger. Our debt burdens are also going to get bigger, and so that has to be balanced as we think about our long-term obligations in total, not just debt.
I have another question about the every 2 years idea. So we mentioned this in the retreat, the need for education and for residents to feel comfortable with that kind of a schedule. So what do you propose in terms of how we connect with residents on this idea, and when would we need to be putting this into place? You know, what kind of engagement needs to happen before we would make a decision?
Sure, I'll be glad to take a stab at that. I definitely think we have time, right, as we really think about, because again, as we're sitting here today, we're in the midst of the 26 budget. This does not really come into play at all from a 26 budget perspective. Now, we are going to do the allocation of the funding and the capital pre-planning, but as we think about what a referendum would look like, you know, you're now in the fall of calendar year 2026. So I know Robin was up here earlier, but that would be an important aspect to consider, is how as a city we would move forward and really have residents understand that by moving in this direction, not only this is the capacity, but this is what that process looks like as it relates to the budget process.
Yeah, I think what I'd be looking for before we gave any direction on this is what that engagement plan looks like, and you know how we can ensure that residents again are aware if this is where we're headed.
Question. Where does 2/3 bonds fall in this conversation? Because I know I've lived through that experience.
Yes.
And can you briefly explain to others what that is as well?
Yeah, so 2/3 is by statute, and essentially the debt you're putting on and the debt you're taking off, you're able to use 2/3 of that capacity. When the city moved back in 2020 to bond anticipation notes, those are those short-term draw programs that we engage in a bank. We spend, we draw, we spend, we draw, then we issue fixed debt. That has reduced our capacity for any 2/3 really until the city would consider another change. Those bond anticipation notes have been, we've utilized them very well here at the city, not only on our general side, but our enterprise as well. So long and short, there is no debt, 2/3 capacity at this time.
Councilor Patton.
Hi, thanks. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. So to start with, you know, our voters are accustomed to, I'm sure at different levels of awareness, some voters walk into the voting booth and say like, Parks bond, that sounds good, check. But certainly a lot of them are accustomed to seeing a package. These are the specific parks projects at the relative funding levels for each project. In this scenario, instead of saying this is a parks bond, we would just say this is the bond, and these are the 2 transportation projects and the 4 housing projects and the 1 park, or whatever mix. Would we still be presenting to the voters a package of things that are paid for with that debt?
Yes. I think the key is, you know, part of the messaging would be, especially after you get past year 1, those projects are coming without an additional tax increase, because the capacity to issue is essentially already included in how the city looks at its funding structure. So you would still have a parks bond. The parks bond, if we use the $90 million example, could be 50 million of the 90 million. And yes, the voters would want to know, what projects that's supporting, et cetera. Then the balance of the 90 could be used for any of those other sort of purposes that I talked about. That's really the key.
Got it. And do you have a sense from other municipalities who've moved to models like this, like what does it say on the ballot? Because when it's on the ballot and it has a specific topic, I think low information voters might be like, oh yeah, I love affordable housing, got it. But this would have such a mix of packages. Like, do you know what it actually says?
So on the general obligation side, they would still be voting on a parks, voting on a transportation, voting on affordable housing. It wouldn't be one kind of bucket, if you will. Yeah, so they would still have I mean, in theory, a parks could pass and a transportation could not pass. I mean, in theory,
Okay, understood.
that wouldn't be ideal.
So I think I'm understanding, and I just want to make sure that I'm clarifying our conversation back from the retreat. In this, since this is just capital improvements, will there be in our conversations the operational costs? And maybe we already answered this, and my head's getting all spun up. But if I'm going to put a bond every 2 years, I'm going to say, oh, here's all the pretty things we can have, but I'm not going to also weigh that and say, here's how much this is operationally going to cost. So you can't just, residents can't just say, oh, I've got this bond, but I don't want another tax increase. Like, it would be two. You would be paying for this and a tax increase in order for us to support that. Am I incorrect saying that, or am I correct saying that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends, but yes, one of the things that the city will need to do, and we do today, I think the example was the fire station earlier, yes, that comes along with an operational burden to the city that is 1 year and then, right? It is a continuing obligation of the city, not just to build the infrastructure, but to support the infrastructure. And so back to that initial kind of funding triangle slide, yes, you could see incremental property tax needs in order to support the infrastructure needs that you see here.
Right. And I just want to make sure that as we have this conversation, that I'm making sure that I'm being clear, because this would, in reality, increase it more frequently. So every 2 years, we're talking about, I need more money. You guys voted on this. Every 2, we have to increase this and this. And so what people are feeling right now in this every 4-year bond structure, I need them to understand that they would feel it more frequently in this structure.
Well, this is one example, and this is over a 4-year period. So there are lots of different scenarios that the city could consider as we, again, kind of talk about what an implementation plan would look like.
Right. I'm just saying that because when we talked in the council retreat, we did talk about every 2 years. So if we're doing stuff like that every 2 years, there's equal raises as we need to operationally fund that as well. So I just wanted to put that out there and make sure that I'm not understanding it inappropriately. But for me, that seems like we're increasing, and residents are going to be like, what is going on? Even though if we explain it as well as we can, I think as we saw with the Parks bond after everybody voted on it, and then we got the emails, don't you raise my taxes? And I'm like, it wasn't me, it was you. So like that, I don't know if I'm going to have that conversation more frequently if we do it this way, but I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I wanted to add, just to lift up what Councilmember Patton said, I'd really like to see the language, because that's what I'm thinking about. When someone goes to the polls and city stuff is at the very end of a ballot and they're tired and they hadn't read about it, and if it says I need money for transportation and parks and city facilities and all these things, it's a hard thing to communicate. And so that's my fear, is that we can't communicate it quickly enough, effectively enough to get the goal, met. So that's where I just want us to be really thoughtful. And I would be curious about other communities' experience with these types of efforts, and if they have seen success, how did they achieve that?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Just one additional comment. Councilmember Jones does make a good point. But I think as you go forward, certain of these projects require staff and others don't. For example, a transportation improvement, a road, a sidewalk, a bikes facility probably doesn't require staff, but certainly police, fire, parks will. So I think it's helpful for the public to know that there are certain improvements that will require additional staff. Solid waste, as city grows, it's an enterprise fund, so they grow to serve demand. But for these, it's important to provide these services, but I think some require some additional cost. Yes, roads should be maintained, sidewalks, but not to the level of a park. So I think it's helpful that as we look at these investments, that the public understands, no, not everything will require additional operational cost. Some will, so at least we, as council members, as we're asked, saying, yes, this one may, this one will not. So I think that is a helpful exercise if we go to this steady state model.
Sure. Yeah. No, thank you for that feedback.
Okay.
All right. Well, just real quickly then, on behalf of Budget and Management Services, really, Saudia hit these key dates. Your second budget work session is scheduled for Monday, March 10th, and your third budget work session is April 7th. And then on May 20th, Budget and Management Services will present the city manager's proposed FY26 operating budget, as well as the 5-year capital improvement program. And with that,
Can you go back to the dates again? I'm sure it's
Yes.
on the schedule, but just want to make sure.
all right, how do I go? Let's see. Oh, gosh. Yep, there we go.
May 20th, okay, half a moment.
May 20th is a calendar.
And my wife's
Yes.
birthday, so we just discussed what a wonderful gift
How
it'll be.
romantic.
Yeah, how romantic.
Thank you.
So that concludes all of the staff presentations for today. And the only note that I would add as part of the communication, which was raised both by a couple council members in regards to bonds and what that predictability looked like. We will also work with our county partners because we have to take into consideration and coordination of when there will be school bonds and Wake Tech bonds so that we don't push our voters into bond fatigue. We've already seen what that looks like. Fortunately, not for Raleigh, and we don't want to be in that position, but there will be lots of coordination with the county and the school system as well when we bring something forward.
So just a question for you. Today was very helpful as a framework for the capital improvements. I see we're going to get the enterprise, but will we see the proposed capital budget before May 20th, or is that just embedded in the overall budget?
Yes, you will see it before May 20th. We will in a manager's briefing.
Yes, you will in a manager's briefing, but the overall package will be, I just got a heart attack right there. But,
Not the finished product.
yes.
Calm down, Sadia. It is typical each year we bring forward before we go public with the draft budget, some highlights in a session with small groups so that you all will get a better understanding of the components of what goes into the full development of the budget. So yes, you'll get a sneak peek.
All right. Thank you all for all the work that went into this.
Thank
And
you.
we are adjourned.
Awesome.